just go with what interests me enough to research it, but I hear you, and I'll try to do more of a variety. Can't please everybody. I wish I could. Anyway, this is the case of Denise Lee. When I read about Denise Lee, I learned that she never wanted to be known as anything but a loving mom and a devoted wife. When this case takes place, she was 21 years old and a truly happy married woman. She met her husband Nate in high school. He hung out with the cool kids, with the ball players, and Denise was, like me, the studious type, and not like me, a math ace. When she finally overcame her shyness her senior year, she decided she was bold enough to ask the guy out who had caught her interest, and they learned quickly opposites really did attract. Nate remembers that people thought that it was the most ironic thing ever because, as quiet as she was, she approached him. 3 weeks after their first date, the couple came upon Valentine's Day, and Nate said it was kind of awkward because they had just started dating, and Valentine's Day was already here, and they didn't know what they should do, but they were falling in love, so he bought her a ring. It cost him $40, and it had this little heart on it, and Denise never took that ring off, even though Nate tried to replace it with another one when he asked her to marry him. Nate describes Denise as perfect. He said just everything about her was perfect, and they hit it off right from the start, and they started a beautiful family, with Noah coming first, and then Adam a couple of years later. Denise decided that she had her hands full raising their 2 little guys, and she put off getting her college degree for a while. Nate was struggling to make ends meet by juggling 3 jobs, but there was way more love in their household than money, and they were okay with that. Nate said that they were going through what most people would describe as tough times. They had 2 little kids, they were young, and money wasn't necessarily on their side, but it didn't matter. They knew that they were going to be fine and that they were going to grow old together. They found a house in Northport, Florida. It was a community about 40 miles south of Sarasota, close to both of their parents, but in a mostly rural setting, and that appealed to Nate and Denise. Denise's father, a man named Rick Goff, was a police sergeant and not entirely comfortable with the feel of the subdivision, which was a little like a new construction ghost town after the housing market had sputtered. The quiet, partly built community suited Nate and Denise just fine. It was the perfect safe haven, and they were enjoying their life. At least they were until Thursday, January 17th of 2008. The day started off normal. It was raining. Nate left for his job on time. He was an electric meter reader, and Denise was at home with their boys. And as most couples do, they checked in with each other periodically on their cell phones. Nate recalls the last time he spoke with his wife was at 11:09, and he said it was about a 5-minute conversation. They were just chit-chatting, normal stuff, and he remembered asking her to make sure that she opened the windows so that they could save some money by turning off the air conditioning, and Denise said she already had. Nate didn't get the chance to call her again until he got off work at 3 p.m. And the phone rang, but Denise did not answer. was quite unlike Denise. And Nate recalls it took him about 25 minutes to get home, and he called 8 times in those 25 minutes. He didn't start to get nervous until he turned onto their street. And as he was pulling in the driveway, he noticed right away the windows, the ones that Denise said she opened, were now shut. When he went inside, things were even more strange. He found his 2 sons, 6-month-old Adam and 2-year-old Noah, lying together in a crib. And Denise was nowhere to be found. At this point, Nate Lee starts freaking out, and he notices the windows are closed. It's very hot in the house, and he looks closer and he realizes they were just like pushed shut. They weren't like shut and latched. They were just pushed down as though someone had closed them in a hurry. And then he discovers that Denise's phone and keys were lying on a chair in the living room. At this point, Nate calls 911 and he says, "This is my address. I just got home from work and my wife is not here and I have looked everywhere." They of course ask him the standard questions, but that 911 call made at 3:29 p.m. was the first of many made that day related to Denise's disappearance. They ask him, "Is her money missing? Were there signs of forced entry? Had you been fighting?" But everything looked normal. The only abnormal thing was that Denise was not there. So Nate decides that the next obvious person to call was his father-in-law, Rick. As I mentioned, was a police sergeant, a 25-year veteran of the sheriff's department in the neighboring county. And Rick had also been trying to get a hold of Denise that day. He'd left a message inviting the family over for dinner, and when he saw Nate's cell phone number pop up, he figured that Nate was calling to accept his invitation. And when he gets the call, he knows that law enforcement looks at spouses in a certain way, skeptically, when they have a missing person. And he goes to the Northport police and he, says to them, "This is different. This is my daughter. We need to hit the ground running. I know my daughter. She would not do this. Can we just get the helicopter and my dogs out there?" He said that he called his chief, his people, and just tried to get everyone that he could. And he just knew in his gut that something bad had happened to his daughter. When the police get to the Lee residence, they start knocking on neighboring doors and they get their first tip from a neighbor. A woman named Jennifer Eckert was staying with her relatives right next door to the Lee house, and she had gone outside at one point and saw a white male sitting in a dark green Camaro in Denise's driveway at 2:30 p.m. This was just 1 hour before Nate got home. Jennifer said that she sat outside for about 10 minutes and he kind of creeped her out, and she thought, he could have stopped over here, and so she went back inside and did not see him leave. So this tells me someone was really sort of paying attention and probably would have heard it if Denise had, screamed. By 5 p.m., an hour and a half after Denise was reported missing, police had a description of a suspect and a vehicle, and a be on the lookout alert was issued. Now her father knows a thing or two about finding people. His job is tracking down fugitives, but they don't usually involve his daughter. He recalled that people came out of the woodwork to help. There were just people everywhere, looking in cars, shining flashlights in people's faces to see, just if they look suspicious, I guess. I can only imagine when a town comes out in force how that could be. At 6:14 p.m., the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office gets a bizarre 911 call on a cell phone. And it is from someone who says that her name is Denise Lee. And Nate was at his home with Rick when they got the call. And at first they thought it was a joke, but this call proved to be very real, and there was nothing funny at all about it. Somehow she had managed to sneak her abductor's cell phone away from him while he was driving and call 911. That call from a terrified Denise has been sealed by, the prosecutor's office, but her dad said they wanted to verify it was her. He heard her voice. The very first thing he heard was her screaming. But she was smart. She said that, she didn't say, she managed to dupe her abductor, and she was trying to convince him, she was having a conversation with him, and she was feeding 911 all this information. She was begging him to take her home, telling, this is my address, take me home, I have kids, my name is Denise. They tell you to personalize yourself with an attacker so maybe they won't hurt you. She was smart enough to give them the make and the model of the car that she was in, which confirmed the tip that the police had gotten earlier in the day. She confirmed that this man was a stranger to her, and about 7 minutes into the phone call, the abductor notices that the phone is missing, and you hear him say, "Where's the phone?" And you hear Denise reply, "I don't know." And then the call abruptly ends. While Denise was pleading with this man for her life, she never got angry. She never cussed at him, which is better than I can say for myself. But she did heartbreakingly say the word please in that 7-minute phone call 17 times. Nate, at this point, is 100% sure they're going to find her. They had a phone call, they could track where this phone was, they could GPS it, and they got this. But it wasn't that simple, of course. This phone was just kind of like a burner phone, not equipped with GPS. The only thing that the police were able to get were pings off nearby cell towers. It meant that she was still somewhere in the area, but they could not pinpoint her. But if they couldn't find out where the phone was, they sure could find out who it belonged to. And it belonged to a man named Michael King. Nate Lee said he has racked his brain looking at it from every possible angle, and he cannot figure out if Denise had ever been in contact with this man, and he said that made it even more scary because he could have been following her for weeks. I found a little bit out about Michael King. He grew up near Pontiac, Michigan. He was the third of 4 boys. He led a fairly normal middle-class life. He was the son of an auto worker. He married, had a son, worked overtime at his plumbing job to make sure that his wife did not have to work. Didn't drink much, didn't use drugs, no history of domestic violence. He was described as being plagued by insecurities. He was shy, and people described him as somewhat dim-witted, which I thought was kind of mean, but then I remembered what happened, and he said that people said that he exaggerated things a lot, that you just could not believe things that he said. That awful 911 call from Denise had given the police a major lead, but authorities still didn't know where their man and his green Camaro were. And then at At 6:23, 9 minutes after Denise's call, the 911 board lights up again. And this one is from someone who originally wants to remain anonymous, but it was later revealed that her name was Sabrina Muxlow, and she was the daughter of the suspected kidnapper's cousin, and she had just gotten a weird phone call from her dad. Minutes before, Michael King had stopped at her dad's house in Northport with a girl tied up in his car. He borrowed some things from her father and left again. The father thought that it was just Mike and one of his weird relationships, so he didn't do anything. At that point, Denise was just 4 miles from her house. Investigators are now getting a better picture of Mike King and where he lived and who he was. And just as Sabrina hangs up, the police get another 911 call. This one comes from a driver, a woman named Jane Kowalski. She's traveling down US Highway 41, and her call comes in at 6:30 p.m. It was made just beyond the Sarasota County line, so it was routed to a different 911 call center. Jane describes to the operator where exactly she is. She says she's on 41 going south. She's crossing over Chamberlain, and she says, "I was at a stoplight and a man pulled up next to me and there was a child in the car screaming." Jane Kowalski believes that she is witnessing a child abduction and wanted to get it. She wanted to call 911 to help. She said it was complete, loud, terrified screaming. This was not a child throwing a tantrum. She said she'd never heard anything like that, and she looked over at this man and gave him a look like, "What is going on in your car?" At that point, a hand comes up and starts banging on the passenger window. At this point, Jane Kowalski had no idea of the abduction of Denise Lee, but like I said, had called 911 because she believed that she was witnessing an abduction. During the call, the 911 operator seemed to be getting all of the information, and in the call, Jane describes like a standoff between her and this man. They're driving down this busy highway, both going like 35 miles an hour, and traffic is piling up behind them, but she is trying to get him to go ahead of her so she can see his license plate. Mike must have caught on though, because he pulls a quick left and she loses him. Within 16 minutes, from 6:14 to 6:30, the police had received 3 911 calls, one from Denise, one from Sabrina, and one from this Jane Kowalski. And yet, authorities, even with a helicopter looking for this car, and patrol officers in 3 counties looking for this, they could not find this green Camaro. Maddeningly, it just seemed like the police were just one step behind Mike King the whole night. They show up at his house and they realize, oh yeah, he's been here, but he is gone. They found duct tape, they found signs that somebody had been held there, but Denise was not there. Meanwhile, back at the Sarasota call center, another 911 call comes through. This time, it was made from a payphone, and the man says, "I want to be anonymous," but he describes what was going on in that green Camaro and was able to add another detail about the car. It had what auto enthusiasts, that's a tough word, call a bra across the front. This mystery caller routine didn't work for very long. Police were able to figure out pretty quickly that this caller was Harold Muxlow, the father of the young woman who had called 911 earlier in the hour. watched this woman struggle with Mike for like 30 seconds, and she even made it outside of the car long enough to yell, "Call the cops," before Michael shoved her back inside. Mike King told him not to worry about it, and Harold Muxlow just chalked it up, like I said, to another one of Mike's crazy relationships. But it bothered him enough to call his daughter, and not enough to call the police to intervene. This was a missed opportunity that Denise's father just cannot understand. He just can't understand how a father with a daughter himself would not call the police. After Harold Muxlow's 911 call, this is where the leads just end. Until 9:16 p.m. when Nate and Rick hear a call come over the radio. A trooper has pulled over a 95 green Camaro with a bra on the front. Michael King was picked up 6 miles from the point where the concerned driver had reported seeing what they believed was a child screaming for help. When Mike got out of the car, he was soaking wet from the waist down. He had a cell phone in his pocket with the batteries removed and a muddy shovel in his trunk. At this point, Nate and Rick are hopeful that Denise will be recovered, but she is not in the car. Michael had his own explanation for what happened that day. He told his cousin they pulled him into the interrogation room, I guess, to try to make him feel comfortable, sort of like they did with Chris Watts and his dad. And Mike tells Harold, "Man, we were both abducted, and I don't know where she is. I just know I escaped, and I don't know who it was, and I don't know what happened." So he leads the police on this sort of wild goose chase, and they go to where he told them, but there was no trace of Denise there. And they're unconvinced at his story, so they charge him with kidnapping. He's in jail, and they're hoping that it'll crack, but they're still searching for Denise. After 2 days of searching, a canine unit stumbles across a shallow grave, and they find Denise. She was about a half a mile from where Michael had been arrested, and she had been shot. Denise's father and husband reached out to all those who had searched and prayed with them. But how much grief can people bear? Like, I can't even. Nate said that he just didn't know how he was going to go through the rest of his life without her. The end of Denise's young life left their community, who had rallied around this family, in complete shock. It was just senseless, and people didn't understand why this man would do this to her. So police really dig in. They want to know about Mike King, and they want to know why he did this to Denise. But they really didn't find a whole lot. He was 36. He was out of work because he'd stopped showing up at his plumbing job like 3 months before. He had lived in Florida since 2002. And the morning of January 17th, he was at the gun range, just practicing his target practice. He had no criminal history except a few complaints filed by his neighbors who suspected him of playing pranks. I found a couple interviews about him just being sort of quiet, unassuming, but a little strange. He sort of had a pattern for disturbing behavior, but none of those people really reported it to the police. He liked to flash women and had one allegation of a rape charge, but no charges were ever pressed. In the days after Denise's disappearance and the discovery of her body, investigators were finally getting a handle on this man. And then this bombshell kind of drops, and it throws them back into the crucial hours of their investigation. And they're kind of wondering, wait, how did this happen? Now remember, there were 4 911 calls from witnesses. 1 from Denise, 2 from the alleged killer's family, and Jane Kowalski. But now at the time, Jane thought she was witnessing a child abduction, but when she saw Michael's picture on the news the next day, she realized that she had been witnessing the abduction of Denise Lee. So she calls 911 and she's like, hey, I was the 911 caller. Do you need any more information from me? And the North Point police are like, what? What 911 caller? Her call didn't go to the North Point police. It went to the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office. And the call never got forwarded to North Point or anyone else searching for Denise, because the dispatchers never sent it out. In fact, it took 2 more days of Denise calling back before investigators in Northport were able to track down this 911 call. And it was a really big deal because she was basically the last person to see Denise alive. She had this visual of this man in this car with a person, and she really could have led the police right to him, but someone dropped the ball. There was an internal investigation, and they sort of realized that the operator, their job was to give the information to the dispatchers, and the dispatchers are the one talking to the deputies with their radios out in the field. Instead of entering it into the computer database, because she thought it was so important, the operator shouted it across to the dispatcher. And the dispatchers who said that they heard her never actually sent the tip out. In the chaos of that night, they simply forgot. John Davenport, the sheriff of the Charlotte County, suddenly found himself confronting attacks on his department's competence. They believe that they screwed up and they could have saved Denise's life. And he says that's just the wrong assumption to make. But, I mean, it's the same assumption I would make. Later on, it even turned out that when that 911 call came in, there was a trooper with a sworn statement that said he was parked on Toledo Blade Boulevard, the very road that King had turned onto when he made that sharp left behind her. So he probably drove right past this trooper. And Nate says every time he hears the story, there's 5 cops in the area, 2 cops in the area, 1 cop in the area. But either way, nobody found her. Sheriff Davenport takes an issue with the shoulda, woulda, couldas. The deputies, he says, were on the lookout for that green Camaro, with or without Jane Kowalski's tip. Was it a missed opportunity? He asks. Well, certainly it was. Would it have changed the outcome? He shrugs. We'll never know. He doesn't think it would have, because they had officers looking for the car, but didn't find it. He believes that the situation was much more stressful because it was one of their own, the daughter of a 25-year veteran of the force, and it was stressful and they were trying to do too much. Sheriff Davenport ordered remedial training for 4 of the call center workers, and 2 of the dispatchers were suspended for a few days. Nate Lee says this is nothing more than a slap on the wrist, and he thinks that much police officers came out to support the daughter of one of their own. A 30-mile funeral procession, rose petals in the road. The fire trucks were backed out of the fire stations with their lights signaling. People were standing on the side of the road, saluting. And amidst this family's grief, questions of Denise's ordeal that day still linger. Why did Michael King choose Denise in the first place? And how did he get her in his car? Nate believes it is because of the Meghan model of the car. Michael King had a 95 green Camaro, and Nate had a 95 green Dodge Avenger, and Nate believes that this man pulled into the driveway and she came outside because she thought it was him. I still don't understand how that means he got her in the car so quietly. And that leaves me the question about the windows. Nate believes it was one of two things. It was either this man shutting the windows so no one could hear her scream, or it was her in a last act of mother's love to save her children from wandering off. The day of Denise's funeral, police got a lab report, and it confirmed that Michael King's DNA was found on Denise's body. So in addition to kidnapping and murder, Michael King would also be charged with rape. He has pled guilty to... He has pled not guilty to all of these charges. When they investigated his Camaro, they found more evidence in his backseat. They found strands of Denise's hair that had been torn out by the roots and stuck underneath the seats. Nate said that she loved law and order, and she knew that they would need the root pull of the hair to identify her. And heartbreakingly, also found in the backseat of that car was the heart-shaped ring that she always wore. Nate said that ring did not come off easily, and he knew she had left it there because it was the only ring that he would 100% be able to identify, because it was the most sentimental thing he'd ever bought her, and she wanted detectives to know it was her. Nate says that just thinking about her going through all of that, but her still being alert enough and smart enough to do whatever she could in case she wasn't found, and she knew that her dad would do everything that he could, and he did. Denise seemed to have done everything that she could to save herself, but Nate really believes that the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office failed her. He really stood firm behind that decision after the revelation of the missed 911 call. But again, Sheriff John Davenport stood firm behind his decision not to fire these call center workers. He said, and I sort of agree with this, those people, there's no punishment I could ever give them that they're not already facing themselves, living with themselves over all of this. They all feel terrible. But, you know, if they choke under pressure, I'm not saying they choked under pressure, I'm saying mistakes happen, mistakes are made, but Officer Sheriff Davenport said, everyone's been under pressure many times. They did not make mistakes before. Everyone does, though. For Nate, that answer just didn't cut it, and he filed an intent to sue. He just said that it was severe incompetence. If you heard Jane Kowalski's 911 call, these kind of lawsuits are typically capped at $200,000. Nate says it's not about the money, but about the accountability. He kind of says, you know, it's just, I hate to say that they're responsible for my wife's death, but they didn't pull the trigger, but they could have stopped this man. lawsuit kind of puts Raquel in an awkward situation because it's against the institution he's devoted his life to working for. And he's taken up the case in his own way. He wants to reform Florida's 911 system, pressing for a state law named after Denise to standardize training for call center workers. He said, "We had cars on the road waiting to apprehend this guy right where she was, and they never dispatched the car on behalf of my daughter. I'd like this bill passed." Again, we just want to instill confidence back in the 911 system. That's why Denise dialed 911. She believed in the system and she was trying to get her life saved. Jane Kowalski also had confidence in the 911 system that night. She tried to get Denise saved, but it just didn't happen. Denise had done everything right that day, leaving behind her own clues, secretly calling 911, screaming for help. But in the end, it just wasn't enough to save her. Nate says that he's really sad that his boys will not know their mother, but that they do have traits of Denise in them. I found that the trial of Michael King officially began August 24th of 2009. Prosecution presented the DNA evidence and other forensic evidence, and other evidence included the change of clothing, the duct tape, shell casing, shovel, and his cell phone. The prosecution also called eyewitnesses, including Jane Kowalski and the cousin Moxley. Defense attempted to prove reasonable doubt by bringing to the jury's attention evidence tampering and contamination, which I think is ridiculous, and they suggested that one of Michael's friends had done this whole thing. Wait, what? No. The judge did not approve of this defense, and they rested without calling any witnesses. On August 28th, 2009, after a 2-hour and 5-minute deliberation, they found Michael guilty of kidnapping with intent to commit a felony, battery and first-degree murder, sexual battery and first-degree murder. On September 4th, 2009, his sentence was handed down. They recommended death in a unanimous vote of 12-0. Honestly, I did not look to see if this man has been executed, because I don't care. I am furious at the fact that they didn't save this girl. I'm furious for her family. I'm furious for her babies. I'm furious for her. If he's been executed, I mean, not that I want to see anybody die, but jeez, man, why did you do this? It seems so weird to me that he got her in the car without that neighbor hearing anything. I mean, he clearly had a gun because that's how she was killed, so maybe he threatened her with it. That's the only thing I can think of. I think Nate is right to believe that some stuff was dropped and that, you know, it was an issue. I don't know. I mean, they had this be on the lookout really early, and a green Camaro is not something you see all the time. So I find it really strange if they had troopers in 3 counties looking out for this car and no one saw it. But I don't think I could pinpoint this is your fault, so and so. I hope that if he does win the money, he does something like put it in a college fund for his little boys or something like that. I'm sad that those little guys have to live without their mom. I can't imagine growing up without my mom. I was going somewhere with that. Oh, so last week I had to redo my CPR, and the guy was telling us that there are only 2 dispatchers in our county. 2. And that's not like 2 per shift, that's 2 total. And so he said, you know, when you call 911, tell them what you need. If you don't need an ambulance, but you need the police, or if you have someone who's in cardiac arrest, you ask for an AED. There's many locations that have an AED that they could maybe get to you before they could get an ambulance to you or something like that. So I'm just thinking about how many 911 calls could potentially go through a county at the same amount of time. You know, I'm sure they have slow nights or busy nights, or, you know, I mean, we do on full moons, and I work in dermatology. So I'm just sad that the ball did get dropped, because that really, I understand why the operator shouted it instead of putting it in the computer, because she wanted to get the information to them as quickly as she should. She, to me, is at just as much fault because she then did not put it in the computer as it should have been, so that maybe the dispatcher could then see it and go, oh my gosh, I need to put this out to a trooper because they said, yeah, I got it, and then this happened and this happened and this happened, and they forgot. So if they maybe could see it on their computer, they could have maybe gotten it out to the trooper that this man was driving past at the time. But again, I can't put my finger on this person did it. You know, like, you did it, you did it, you did it. There wasn't just one person that's at fault here, and that makes it a hard thing to deal with, I think. And again, another airplane. I filmed this earlier and the audio did not work, and there were about 50 planes in it, and my dog was losing her mind, so hopefully this one is better. Man, I had a rough day filming today. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. Please tell me what you think down below. Do you think that the police have to claim some responsibility for the fact that Denise was not found before she was killed? Or do you think that there was nothing they could have done? Thank you guys so much. I appreciate each and every one of you. We are about 300 subscribers away from 5,000, which is